Hi everybody, after some positive feedback about the video I made on my collection of Leicas, today I would like to show you another brand that I'm, let's call it, following, and that's Nikon. And with Nikon also I have this, I started using a Nikon D100 as a DSLR. And before that I had used several film Nikons, and I kind of liked it, and then I followed up and sold all my film gear from Nikon, and then I slowly started reacquiring some. It's not systematic, I would like to say. It's not like a historic overview, but it's some cameras made by Nikon throughout history that I kind of like. And so let me start with the oldest one that I have, and that's the Nikon F2. This is a beautiful camera. I mean, not this specifically because it's kind of beaten up, and I personally use it a lot, and it has been used a lot before I got it. But this is what you can really recognize at that time's professional tool. It has very few settings for you to do. Back then there wasn't much you could influence, because you put in the film and that's basically your sensor. It has a built-in exposure metering, so you can really use it as an everyday camera, and it's really a brick. I mean, this camera is a tank. I would say more so than, for example, the F3. This camera was really, it feels like one solid piece of metal. I like to use this camera. This camera has a few features. For instance, I don't know if I can show it to you like this, but to use the exposure meter that is basically part of the prism, the lens you're using has to communicate with the camera to tell it the maximum aperture. And to do so, basically there's those two little ears, the bunny ears on the older lenses, and they grab a part here and drag it. That's why when you put in on a new lens, you have to go all the way in the two directions to basically set the exposure metering system to know what the maximum aperture of this lens is. And that's a very interesting solution if you think about a time when there were no electronics that could just send a signal and say, I'm a 1.2, I'm a 1.4 lens. So that's a really cool thing. I like to use this camera a lot because it's usable. It's a camera that you can take out, use. It's heavy, but I will get into some comparisons later in this video and show you some details and some considerations on weight and size issues. So maybe to stay on the professional series, not so much historically, the next one in line would be the Nikon F3. I'm sure you will all admire this beautiful strap I have. It's actually an original Nikon strap. You have the two loops for some spare films, because that's like a pouch for SD cards now. So you would carry this around. This also is pretty used, but it's a camera that works very well, and I will show you another F3 that I use less because it's in better condition. So actually, the better the conditions of the camera are, the less you're keen to use it and expose it to the risk of being damaged if it's an old camera. That doesn't happen with new cameras, to me. So this camera, for the first time, or probably not for the first time in history, but in the professional line, had this system that would drag the lens information from the lens to the camera. So it didn't have this solution where you would have to turn your aperture wheel on the lens to tell the camera what maximum aperture the lens has. This is a beautiful camera. It doesn't have much you can do. You can set your ISO here. Then you have exposure compensation here. It's a little hard to get this function to work, but you press this button and then you turn this little wheel around and that sets the exposure compensation. For everything else, it has an on-off switch. This camera will not work without batteries, except for this special function that they put in. They put in case of not having a battery for this camera, even without switching it on, which you do here. This is how you switch the camera on and off. Another curious thing is this self-timer switch. It's incredibly hard in all Nikon F3s that I've ever had. So you have to pull this over here, and then it's set to auto expose, and then pull it back. So let's say you don't have a battery in the camera and you still want to take pictures, and you either have an external exposure metering solution or you know your light. What you can actually do is you pull down this little lever here. I don't know if you can see it in the video. So there's this little lever that is next to the button that you use to memorize the exposure metering if you want to recompose the image. That would be this one you press. But this little lever is actually a release button that switches the camera to a mechanical aperture speed of 1/60th of a second, and that will always work. I will just waste a frame now to show you this. You pull it and the camera will be released even without turning it on. I think if the battery is in and the camera is on, this will work just as an alternative to the normal release button, and it will respect the times that the measuring system suggests, but usually this is just the override for mechanical exposure. For everything else, you just have your usual dials and buttons. Not much. This is the aperture preview button, the metallic one here. Then you can lock the mirror with this one. And this is basically all you can set in a camera like this. The other F3 that I have is actually a nice little, it's a little beauty. It's the F3 /T, and it's the titanium model. It has a slightly different surface structure here. It's a little more matte. This camera was probably more for marketing purposes. The whole F3, not everybody knows it because it's not so evident, because it looks like a camera to be used, but it was actually designed. It was one of the first major projects in product design. It was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro, an Italian design company for Nikon, and he was actually apparently the one who introduced this red line for the professional product lines by Nikon, and that has been pulled through through time. This version of the camera is basically identical except for the materials used. So I don't know which parts exactly are made from titanium, and you don't realize there's a huge weight difference. So titanium should be lighter than the other materials. But this is definitely something that it's probably one of the few cameras that I have more for display or for, for my pleasure than to use. So this is my second F3. And then we move on. I don't have an F4. I used to have an F4 for everyday use, and I don't have one anymore. But just recently I got a chance to get one of these. And this is the F5. And this is actually my last, because even the F6 I did not get. The F6 is I have ambiguous feelings about the F6, because the F6, for example, was the first one to require very special batteries, rechargeable batteries. And this one, even though it eats up batteries like crazy, but using film, that is not so much of an issue. But this one you just use with 8 AA batteries that you can get anywhere, and this will really do the job. And this is a really brutal machine, because this is a real professional camera like the ones that we are used to nowadays. Form factor is very similar to the modern ones. And if you actually compare them to something like this, which was the professional Nikon at its time, there's a huge difference. I mean, this one you hardly want to carry around because it's really very, very heavy. And with this one you also have, you basically have what you're used to in terms of functionalities in the modern digital cameras. You have a pretty advanced exposure metering system, you have matrix metering, you have very high speeds. I will try to see if I can. So this is basically a machine gun, and you can set this camera to do more or less anything that a modern camera can do with just with film. So it's not as evolved, like the metering system doesn't have, I don't know, 50 something metering points, but it has several metering points, and you can switch between them. It has autofocus. Actually, I forgot to mention that this is one with autofocus. The F3 didn't have an autofocus. So this is actually something that corresponds to what you're used to nowadays in a professional Nikon camera. So this is and now I will switch back to some other cameras, because when I got the F5, I also was looking for an F100, and I got one actually at more or less the same time. And the F100 is virtually the same camera as the F5, just the prosumer version, you would call it nowadays. It's a lot smaller, you can see that. It's really substantially smaller, but in terms of functions, it's very, very similar. It's a lot lighter. It's still pretty much weather sealed, for example. So you can, for everyday use, this is probably the far better solution, because with the F5, to be quite honest with you, you end up not carrying it around, not taking it around, not using it. This is a really cool camera because it has all the functionalities of a top-of-the-line film professional camera, but in a body that is more reasonable to carry around and to use, especially since you're not going to do assignments for on film. So this is something that you carry around, you put a lens on, and you take around and you use every day. One thing I would like to point out, all these, the F100 and the F5 work perfectly with the newest of Nikon's autofocus lenses. So you can swap back and forth between them very, very easily. Okay, now a few other cameras, actually 2 other cameras that I would like to show you, because they were the cameras that when I was growing up were the ambition of a young photo enthusiast. This was the FE2. It's a very compact camera. It's not the most compact camera. Nikon has a camera, I think it's called the EM, that was actually supposed to be a ladies' camera, so they made it a lot smaller even than this one. But this was a very usable everyday camera for amateurs. It has aperture priority, so you can set it to A and make it, you know, go. It has 1/4000th of a second maximum speed, so it's a decent speed to work with, and it's still very robust. It's very nice to handle. and I like to use this a lot. And then there was another interesting camera made by Nikon. That was the FA. And the FA was the first step. It still looks like the older ones, but it was actually the first step where they put in, for example, program function. You can try to show it to you. So you have what you're used to now. You have your P, your S, your A, and your M for a program, speed priority, aperture priority, and manual settings. And it has something that is, well, it's basically matrix metering. So there's a processor inside the camera that evaluates the lighting situation you're in and will act accordingly. I don't know if there's this function is activated through this very hidden little button here. I hope this will focus on it. And you have to basically press it in and turn the little button around to deactivate it. And when it's turned and outside, the matrix metering is active. Maybe they put it there because they themselves didn't believe in this matrix metering. I cannot say. Maybe I'm being mean to Nikon in these terms. What I can really say, it's a nice camera to use. This one I just got because I was curious about this matrix metering thing. And after getting rid of some other digital SLRs by Nikon, and because I have a rather vast collection of Nikon cameras and Nikon lenses and old Nikon lenses, that's why, and that's when I decided to buy the DF. And this is maybe to show you the similarities they have. The body looks quite similar in terms of shape, but the size is totally different. I mean, look at these two things. They have nothing to do with each other. Even if you take this one and the F3, which was the professional model, they have nothing in common, basically. I mean, these are just cameras that have an architecture that looks similar, but they're not. I mean, they're not the same thing. And something that came up in other videos about the DF, they did this attempt of going retro, but for example, one of the major problems I see very often with the DF and manual focus lenses, it's just damn hard to focus if you don't have a split prism. There's no way you can really judge, especially if I put on, this is the kit lens for this one, so it's a 1.8, but I have the 1.2 50mm lens, and the depth of the field of that lens is so narrow that you really have to be so accurate when focusing. So there's basically no way you can reasonably use that lens with this camera reliably. Now, being digital, that's not so much of an issue because you take the shot, you zoom in, you take the shot again if you weren't in focus. But that's just something I would like to mention. Okay, so thanks for watching. This was my Nikon collection, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's some nice old cameras, and all of these cameras are in use, working, and doing their job. Thank you very much, and have a great day.